So let's go ahead and take a look today at this idea behind positive, or pardon me, gosh, I had those positive negative space questions got me messed up, Caleb. Let's go ahead and take a look at 1 and 2 point perspective. So today I want to talk to you a little bit about sighting. Now, in my previous lecture this week, we looked at perspective. And one of the biggest things to your success for perspective is to go ahead and identify your horizon line or your line of sight. Remember that that horizon line or line of sight changes based off of whether you're standing or sitting in a chair or sitting down on your butt. So remember, the horizon line is basically where the ocean meets the sky when you're at Pismo Beach and you look way out there. So what we're seeing here is an example of an artist using sighting to estimate the approximate height of this conical kind of pyramid shape that we see on this desk. Now he's using a pencil. Now I'm encouraging you to use rulers for this because I find that when we use the rulers, we're able to use the metric side and very accurately, consistently, we are able to take nice measurements that translate really well. So you can see here that he's using a pencil and he's lining it up and it's intersecting his line of sight, and he's placing that pencil tip right at the tip of the conical pyramid that you see here. And then also he's brought his thumb up to the bottom of where he sees the bottom of this pyramid based off of his sight. He then takes this measurement and then translates it down onto his tablet down there. Here's another example of this. You can see that this young gal is doing portraits. She's drawing. And again, what is she doing? She's assessing size and scale. Again, sighting with the pencil, evaluating the overall height of his head and the width of his shoulders. So again, this is based off of that reference that you're putting in between you and your vision. Okay, so in this case, I want to encourage you guys to go ahead and use a ruler for this. Now, looking at this, let's talk about sighting angles. Now, angles are very important to understand because you want to be able to translate those correctly down to the page. Here, the artist is holding up his drawing stylus, and you can see that he has it level. And notice the little curved arrow right here indicating that he's going to align this pencil with this edge right here. And then he can slowly bring his hand down to the drawing tablet to translate that angle down on the page. So when we do sighting for angles, we hold our ruler or our drawing stylus at a perpendicular angle to the actual object. And then pretend that there's a flat sheet of glass in front of you that you're pushing your pencil up against. The pencil should never project out into space. And so you want to kind of rotate it left and right till you find that angle. Here's an example of what a 2-point perspective drawing might look with multiple objects in it. Now, here we can talk about what this actually entails. So you're going to start with the horizon line. Now, I'm going to show this to you today. And then you're going to sight the angles of an object. I've got an object that I'll show you here in a few minutes. It's just a box that I found in the garage. But the thing that I want you to understand here is that all the objects in the setup that we're currently looking at right now, this drawing, all of these objects share the same horizon line or line of sight, basically from the artist's perspective, okay? But they all have different vanishing points that fall at different points on that horizon line. And that's based off of how the objects are rotated in relationship to what the viewer is actually seeing. So if we were to look at objects that are set in a 1-point perspective, this is a pretty good example. And I want you to pay attention here. The horizon line would be right here. How do I know that? Because all the vanishing point lines converge right to this point. And the vanishing point or vanishing points always lie on the horizon. So what we're seeing here is we are seeing objects that rise above the line of sight or the horizon for the artist, as well as we see objects that are right just below the horizon, and we also see objects that fall well below the horizon of what the viewers or the artist is actually seeing. Take a look at this next shot. This is an example of 2-point perspective. Now notice they all share a common horizon line, and also notice the vanishing points. There are 2 sets of vanishing points. All the vanishing points on this side vanish to 1 point, And notice that they are all the lines that are parallel heading that way. They all vanish that direction. Notice that the lines to the right of the objects, for instance, here, 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 and down here, they all vanish to the right side of the horizon line to this vanishing point. And again, we have some objects that look to appear to be above the horizon line based off the way the artist has drawn them. We have a couple that intersect right in the middle of the horizon line and some that fall beneath it. So today, I'm going to be using this little guy. Just had to get new piping for our air dryer. And so I found this box. I prefer it to be square, but it's okay. It's rectangular. Now, this is a basic setup, and this is actually what I'm seeing right now, looking for my computer past it. And you notice that I have a blue piece of tape on the wall. That blue piece of tape I put there as a reference point because that is going to represent my horizon line. So as I'm sitting in my chair right now, if I look directly across, that line is at the exact same height as my eyes are while I'm sitting where I'm going to work. That's important to understand because you need a static point of reference to measure down. So today you're going to see me set this up, and then you're going to start to see me draw on a pad. And I want to explain how I'm going to approach this visually really quickly so it makes sense as you start to watch me draw this. First things first, I will plot a horizon line on my pad. And I'm going to plot that about a third of the way down from the top. I'm going to go horizontal with my pad. Then once I've got that horizon line down on the pad, I'm going to physically hold my ruler up and sight and measure how far this front corner right here is from the bottom of my horizon line. So I'll measure down to that point and I will mark it. Then I will go ahead and measure from this point down to the bottom corner of the box to go ahead and figure out what that height is, and then I will go ahead and mark this as a solid line. And that really cleans up a lot of the work that you have to do because after this, it's all sighting and a couple of measurements. Because now I have the correct height and I have the correct location. Now I can take my ruler and I can hold it out with both arms and sight this angle right here. And I always do the bottom angles. And I never do multiple angles for one side, I only do one. So this line and this line will go to the same vanishing point as this line. So I only need to sight one of them. So best practice is always sight the bottom one. Okay, so I'll sight this and then I'll draw it and it will cross my vanishing or my horizon line over here, creating a vanishing point for all the lines that go that direction. I will do the same thing for this side where it crosses out here for my horizon. That'll create my second vanishing point, and then these lines and these lines right here will go, and that creates this back corner. And then lastly, I'll have to draw these vertical lines to give it that overall face. Now, so I'm going to show you this, and then I'm going to go ahead and show you a one-point perspective. And I'll actually show you two one-point perspectives. Now, this is a classic one-point perspective where you only see the front face and the top face, as opposed to in this one where we see the left and the right face as well as the top face. So that's how I know this is a two-point perspective. And it's generally a really even mix of about 60-40. Once it starts to get to 70-30, it starts to push more towards what we call a one-point perspective. Now, this one is a classic view of a one-point perspective and very easy to draw because all I have to do is sight from my horizon line down to this line, scribe it, and then measure from here down and scribe it, and then put the sides on, and then I can very easily find the vanishing point for this object because it's going to fall right in the center. I can bisect this all the way up and put a mark right here and take my lines down. So that's what I'm going to be working on today and show you this process. I'm going to ask you guys to go ahead and work on this process over the weekend and next week. We will have a second portion of this assignment for perspective that we'll look at the beginning of next week. Go ahead and pause here for a second. All right. For this, you can see that I've got a relatively large ruler. You don't need one just as big, but if you have one, it's good to use one of these. And also you're going, hey, Jefferson, Mr. Clark, that doesn't look like my sketchbook. I know, it doesn't. I'm going to demo on this large piece of paper so you understand the concept. And what I'm going to ask you guys to do is be resourceful. Find a Trader Joe's bag or an old Vons bag, a paper one, and open it up and spread it out and use that. Now, if that doesn't work for you, go ahead and take 6 sheets out of your sketchbook and line them all up and put tape across the back to tape all the seams, and then flip it over and work on the front. But I strongly believe you need a relatively big piece of paper so you understand how this works. Because I want you to get to a point to where you understand perspective, so you don't have to employ a horizon line and vanishing points all the time if you understand how to constrain objects within your perspective. Now today I'm going to be using a black ballpoint pen that's primarily just for demo so that you can actually see the drawing contrast here. For you at home, I would recommend just using your HB pencil that comes in your kit and your eraser. So as I start this, the first thing I'm going to do, remember, I'm going to go ahead and plot my horizon line. And this is from my experience. I've done this for 20 years. You should always plot the horizon line a third down from the top of the page. That means about 33%, right? So it's an approximation. So I'm going to go right about here. And I'm going to scribe that all the way across, and that's what I want you to do as well. So this represents my horizon line. Now, let's go ahead and take a look at our object. And I actually need to rearrange mine just a second. All right. I just turned mine so I could go ahead and do a 2-point perspective. So what I'm going to do first now is I'm going to go ahead and grab my ruler. And if you have a ruler, I recommend using one that's got metric on it, because metric is a heck of a lot easier to divide. For instance, if you have to divide 20 or 40 in half, it's very easy as opposed to a fraction if you're using standard. Okay, so I recommend the metric side. So what I'm going to do right now, I'm going to measure down from my horizon line, locking my arm out and holding my ruler as steady as I can. Probably shouldn't have had this Red Bull. All right, so let's take a look here. I get, looks like 10.5. So I'm going to go ahead and actually pick a point probably right about here. The reason I'm moving this over a little bit is because right now I can see more of the left-hand side of the panel than I can of the right. So that means that the right one is a little bit steeper, so it'll get to the horizon line quicker. So if I do 10.5, and so I measured 10.5 down from the horizon line to the top corner of that box. What I'm going to do, however, is I'm going to cut that measurement in half so we can make sure that we actually see my lines vanish on the horizon. So instead of 10.5, that's going to be 5.25. So this little point, you probably can't see it right now, but it's the tip of my pen. That represents the front corner. Now I'm going to measure from that front corner down to the bottom of the box to figure out how tall it actually is. And for that, I get 5.5, so that will be 2 3/4 tall, because remember, I'm cutting my measurements in half right now. Quarters. Now, in linear perspective, when we're drawing lines like this line right here represents the front corner of that box. These vertical lines should be parallel to the sides of the page. And any horizontal lines that are actually horizontal should be horizontal to the tops and bottoms of pages. But generally, you're going to have more vertical lines that should be parallel to one another. This will make sense after I actually take these lines back. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my ruler, and I'm going to hold it with both hands and pretend there's a flat sheet of glass in front of me. And I'm going to go ahead and rotate this ruler like so alongside that angle, and then translate that angle down. Notice that I'm only doing the bottom angle. I always stick with the bottom angle. So that just created vanishing point number 1 for me. Now, since I have this side of the box, I know that this corner has to go there. Remember, we're constraining the objects. This is based off the laws of linear perspective. And in doing so, as we constrain the objects, when you do a final drawing, if you're using linear perspective for all the objects, it creates a very believable, realistic three-dimensional space on a 2D piece of paper. So now I have this side. Now I'm going to go ahead and cite the bottom angle for this panel. Again, holding my ruler out with both hands, going to pretend there's a flat sheet of glass in front of me, and I'm going to line that up. Okay, so that creates VP2, vanishing point 2. Now, I'm going to go ahead and anchor my ruler here and take this corner back to that new vanishing point. Like so. Okay, so that looks pretty good. Now, let's go ahead and talk about how to find this back corner and the other lines. First thing we need to do is we need to go ahead and measure the distance from this line to the right-hand edge and then from this line to the left-hand edge. And when you think about that, you should think about these vertical lines. Pretend that there are 3 strings that are hanging in space up against a window, and you're just measuring the distance between them. Again, I'm going to do that with my ruler, and I'm going to cite. And remember, I'm cutting my measurements in half right now, which you'll probably want to do for this as well. So I get 3. So it's going to put me at 1.5 if I got 3. I only need 1 mark because I know that this line is going to be parallel to this edge as well. Okay, so I just created that corner. So let's go and anchor my ruler at vanishing point 1. Take it over to that corner right there. And I can take that right back like so. Now I just need to measure from here to the right-hand edge. Same thing, and that'll set up the other corner for me when I take that back. And so for the right-hand side, I get, it's about 2.5. It's going to be just like so. Now I have this corner, and I already know that this line and this line go to this vanishing point, as is this corner will too. So again, I'm going to anchor there, bring my ruler up. Okay, and then we have a 2-point perspective. Now I want to remind you about this. When you're doing this, what we are doing is we're constraining objects. Okay, whatever it is in the setup that we're looking at, we're constraining all those objects to this principle of linear perspective. Now, the objects here are not going to look exactly like what you see, okay, because we're constraining these. We're sighting and angling and constraining them. But it will always give you a very realistic 3-dimensional rendering of your space. So this is 2-point. Let's go ahead and take a look at what a 1-point would look like. Give me just a second. I'm going to rotate my box here. So now I have rotated my box like we saw previously in the second picture, where I could only see the front face and the top face. And for this one, I'm just going to go 1-to-1. I'm not going to cut the measurements in half because I know already that I'm not going to have a lot of vanishing points going off to the left or right-hand side. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure down from my horizon line just like I did before, and I'm going to measure down to the front top face of that box. And get 11.5. And I'm just going to go ahead and do it on this side. It's kind of arbitrary where I'm doing it. Putting just kind of a guide center line here for myself. Okay. So 11.5 from my horizon line down to the top front edge of the front face. And now I'm going to measure the height of that front face. Now remember, for this one, I am going 1-to-1. I'm not having my measurements this time because I don't need to. And I get right under 6.5. Okay. So there's the overall height of the box as I see it right now when I sight and measure. Now I'm going to measure the overall width and split that equally on the left and right hand side of this vertical line that I just drew. And I get just a little over 4. So that's going to be about 2 and a skosh there. Just a little bit there. All right. Now, let's go ahead and drop these lines and see how we look. Okay, so there's the front face in that box. And remember, I still have the top panel to do. Now, here's what I like about one-point perspectives. They are incredibly easy, especially when you only see the front and the top. That means that the vanishing point is going to be right down the center line of this axis that I did, this kind of reference line. So now I can go ahead and put my pen here, anchor my ruler, and take it back to where that reference point crosses back there at my horizon line. I'll do the same thing for this corner right here, just like so. Now the only thing that's left for me is to create the back edge of the box. And I will do that by measuring from my horizon line down to the very back edge of the box, and then I will plot that line. So let's see what that is. 9.5. And just a second. Having a great Friday. The lens just popped out of my glasses. Yay! All right, so let's come back to this. So measure down from my horizon to the back edge of that box as I saw it, and now I can go ahead and scribe that back edge. So this represents a basic one-point perspective, meaning that it only has one vanishing point. Whereas when I had the box rotated towards me, when I could see the left and right hand faces as well as the top, it created two vanishing points. Now let me show you really quickly another one-point perspective where you might actually see the left and the right hand side as well as the top. It's a little confusing, so sometimes you kind of have to make a judgment call on actually, is this a true one-point perspective or is it a two-point perspective? So for this, I'm going to actually just draw this from memory. So if I was actually looking at the object, I would be obviously sighting down. So let's say I've sighted down and that object is at 10. Let's say I sight the height, overall height of the object, and maybe it's at 4. We'll just make this a square. It'll be easy enough to do. So let's pretend I've sighted an angle from the front face of this angle. And I sighted it and created a vanishing point for me on my horizon line. Well, I know where this corner is going to go now. Okay, I know where this corner is going to go now as well. Messed up there a little bit, sorry. And now this is where I might see that very small sliver. Generally what you see is about a 75 to 25% mix, 75% to the front of the box and 25% or less of the side of the box, and it looks very compacted. So again, when you try to find that, figure that out, you're going to imagine these are 3 strings hanging in space, and you're going to measure that distance between them. Once you scribe this last line right here, that sets up this corner right here to define the back edge of the box. Again, coming up, anchor that ruler, and take that all the way across. So here you can see that we have an example of a 2-point, but here we can still see the same number of planes. However, notice the mix as far as the object is concerned. It forces it to become a more classical 1-point perspective. So you can obviously see many different types of 1-point perspectives and 2-point perspectives. It all just depends on how you're going to set your setup when you have your objects. Now, within the context of the setup, I've got, I'm on a table here, and I actually have my box about 6 feet away, and it's on a house planter stand that's, I don't know, about the height of the table. And then I've taken that tape and put it as a reference point on the back wall. So if you don't have tape, it could even just be as simple as maybe using the backsplash in the kitchen on the back of the wall, because that's generally about the right height for most people. Or sometimes, depending on the heights of the windowsills or ledges in your bedroom, sometimes that can be a good reference point. But what you're going to need is a constant static horizon line reference point that you can consistently measure down from for the objects. So let's review how I did that 2-point really quickly. I did my horizon line, and then I measured down from this point right here all the way down to this corner right here. I scribed that corner, and then I measured the height of the box, and then I scribed that line down to this corner right here. And then I held my ruler up with both hands and sighted this bottom angle to find that, and I took that back, and that created my vanishing point 1 on this side. I did the same thing for this side to find my second vanishing point over here. Remember, sight only one angle, generally from the bottom, on either side if you have a 2-point perspective to find that vanishing point. Then once you've established that, these other lines go back to that common vanishing point. And that is us constraining our objects to the law of linear perspective. Again, so that when you end up with a final setup, look how, even though these are all abstract and drawn on the same piece of paper, they all look like they're more or less on the same ground plane. That's because they share a common perspective, and you're drawing from a fixed point of view. Okay? Does anybody have any comments, questions, or concerns about the demo game? Anybody at all?
Is this going to be on Google Classroom, so we can
look
at it?
It is. I'm going to put this on Google Classroom for you later on, probably today. I just need to get it processed. And let's make sure I got the right one. There we go.